First time I ever picked up a worm drive SkilSaw was 1976, I think. Yeah, about 18 years old. And I had my first carpentry job, and sure enough, the tools they were using were an earlier generation of these guys. Just before this one. And I picked one of those things up and I fell in love. I've used that more than any other single tool in my life, with the possible exception of a hammer or a nail gun. And I've got to tell you, I'm a big fan. So the first one that I owned would have fallen into this lineup right between this guy and this guy. It was all aluminum, the case was all aluminum, but it was shaped exactly like this. This one, by the way, belongs to my dad, who's still living, and could still use this, but I don't think he probably ever will. But the first one that I had was a big improvement over these guys, but it was probably closer to these guys than these guys. I mean, they've come a long way, and every time there was a change, when it went from the all aluminum gray metal housing to a plastic handle, which was gray on the next 2 or 3 saws that I owned, and then when they came along, you know, each time moving forward and getting a little lighter and refining some of the characteristics and changing the color, I noticed that I always was at first a little skeptical, and then a little excited, and then a little curious, and eventually I'd get my hands on one, and when the last saw got killed or got bent or got stolen or got, you know, whatever happened to it, I was anxious to get my hands on the next iteration. And I've never been disappointed. They've always improved their product and made it a little easier to get a little more work done at the end of the day. So we're here today to talk about this guy, latest, greatest. And you know, I've used it hard enough now to have an opinion, but I've got to say that when it first showed up, I had the same reaction I'd always had, a little skepticism, a little excitement, and just a little hesitation to actually jump ship, right? Pretty. Do we like to pay for pretty? Feels light. And having pointed that out, these two that look so much the same, I had a ton of hesitation about this one, because this one, for the first time, had been made overseas, made in China. You can see looking at them that these look like the exact same saw. This one got a little run over and the table got tweaked, and so I bought a new one and I used it until the tightening lever broke off the tilt, and it was time to step over to this. These got lots of life left in them. But circling back to the whole idea of made in USA, made in China, and how disappointed I was to see that when I opened the box, I used this for I think 3 years and it never let me down. In fact, if the lights were off and I had to use one or the other, I couldn't tell the difference. They get the same work done. And so, yeah, I'm not happy that these things aren't made in the United States anymore, but I'm still happy with the work they produce. So I don't quite remember, but I think when I unboxed this a year ago, there were about 3 things that I was skeptical about, made me nervous. That's going to take some getting used to. You know, I guess that's better. That I was prepared to be disappointed about, and each one was a swing and a miss. My snap judgment was bad judgment. The first of those that I remember, the first of those that I remember was this wrench that rides along on the saw. I was just sure that it was going to drop out, you know, someday on the job and I would lose it. Well, the only time so far in the last year that this has ever dropped out was when I was filming that video, and it dropped out here at the bench because I put it back in upside down. The thing's ridden along, it's been there exactly when I needed it, and it is real darn handy to have the wrench with your saw and not dangling on your bags or back in the truck or lost. Item 1 that I was worried about turned out to be a real plus. The second thing that I was skeptical of, that I could see would be fine when it was new, but I didn't think would hold up, was a cast magnesium table, because cast implies brittle. And it may be brittle. This has fallen off a sawhorse, I think maybe twice, but it's fallen off onto a wood deck. If it would have fallen onto a slab, it may have broken, but it's taken a couple of short drops and no problem. The thing is still just flat. And it seems to slide a little easier because of the grooves, and so I have no reason to be skeptical of this cast magnesium table, because after a year, and not a ton of use, I mean, you can see I've not put a lot of time on this, but I framed a house with it, and that's not a bad test run, right? So the table, as far as I'm concerned, boys, it's a winner. I remember opening it up and looking over the blade lock and thinking that doesn't look right, and looking at another saw, and sure enough, on the earlier saws, the blade lock went in where you would press kind of lengthways, and on this one you're pressing across the saw. Well, as it turns out, that's a little easier to hold tight. You know, when you're working this, it's an improvement. So that's a plus. I remember looking at this tilt mechanism and thinking, what is that? And it looks a little too busy and it's going to break off. Well, it didn't break off. It's not too busy. I'll call it a protractor, the register, the degrees that are marked on there are embossed and are way easier to be accurate with. The indicator is, I like it. And not only that, the big plus is it's got a stop, which is only marginally effective, at 45 degrees exactly. That's a plus. And you pull that back and it'll go all the way up to 53 degrees, which is real handy for making cheek cuts. So that is just a big net improvement. Good job on that scale. I mean, it's not over-engineered, but it's engineered adequately, so that's all to the good. And I believe the last thing that I was concerned about was just the feel of the plastic. It felt a little wrong. Well, it turns out it feels exactly right. And when I pick up the other saws, you know, they're a little slicker. The coefficient of friction, what is that? Young's modulus, I think, is different. And so that just sticks in my hand just right. It's very positive. So the things that I would have put on the questionable, suspicion, skeptical list have been crossed off one at a time. I like every one of them. And the things that I identified right off the bat as a plus, that is, it's a little lighter, Skyhook is built in, were in fact validated as being improvements. The only thing now, after a year, that I can point at that frankly seems to not have been an improvement is that for some reason the bottom of this guard tends to slide on the work rather than getting a hold of the work and rolling itself open. There's something about the geometry or something that you almost have to put your thumb on that guard to bring it up. But I've thought of a hack. Can I say hack? I don't know, I'm too old maybe to say hack. I've thought of a way to modify the saw and improve it, and I'll be showing you that in a video here one of these days. It'll take care of that problem, I think. So I guess the bottom line is this: I love my saw. And some portion of that is because some of their adaptations have been real improvements. But probably, if I'm honest, the biggest thing that's happening here now is that this has slipped into the center point of my confirmation bias. It's what I'm used to. It feels good in my hand. Now, maybe that's an oversimplification, because I had this saw and my previous saw in my toolbox all summer, and after about 2 months I found myself always pulling this one out. This became go-to. And I don't think that it just somehow displaced most favored status on the old saw because it was newer. I think that it is more user-friendly. But having said that, the distinction is subtle. And honestly, I think probably a lot of the choices we make in tools and soda pop and the brands or the pickup we drive is, in fact, confirmation bias. And that's okay. We're human. And so perhaps the takeaway is this: you use the tool that you can use. That the focus needs to be on what you're producing, how much of the work, the quality of the work, you know, how bad you either hurt or don't hurt at the end of the day, and try to be aware of when you need to overcome your biases. We're going to talk more about the cordless versus corded phenomenon and biases that I undoubtedly bring to the party. And as I have thought about this, getting ready to do this video, I thought, wait a minute, as much time as I've spent proclaiming that I don't care about appearance, I guess I kind of do care about appearance. I mean, look how nicely that Diablo blade goes with that blood red handle, right? And in a production situation, at least when I was a younger man, when I showed up and pulled the worm drive out of the box, it was sort of a wartime attitude, or at least an athletic event attitude. And there's something about the color red on a job site, particularly a job site where you're up off the ground and you're plunge cutting and you're you know, you're having to occasionally take a chance in order to do the work that you have to get done. Doggone it. Red is the color of war, isn't it? Red is the color of competition. Red is the color of assertion and aggression, and I don't know. But whatever color your SkilSaw is, they're all great tools. So here's my conclusion. I like it. It's my go-to saw. I intend to put a lot of miles on this thing. And if I'm honest, it's probably pretty much just because I'm used to it now. It fits my hand. It comes right up off the ground. I can anticipate exactly what's going to happen when I use it. And it really doesn't matter too much what kind of a saw you're using. If you get a saw, or you're given a saw, or you find one in a garage sale, use it for a while before you arrive at what would essentially be a snap judgment about whether or not it's going to, you know, fill the bill. Odds are you're going to get used to it, and you will hesitate to change horses. You'll hesitate. Now, the last point on this is I don't know exactly how long it's going to last. I've never ridden one of these to exhaustion before. I've never ridden any SkilSaw to exhaustion because they never die of old age on my jobs. They always die of injury accidents. Bad luck. A SkilSaw sometimes has bad luck and comes to the end of the line. I think you can't go wrong unless you happen to get a lemon, like happens in every other item that we ever buy. There is the odd disappointment. But in general, I intend to be running this saw for a good long time, and when it gets killed, I intend to get another one. Skill did not send me this saw. Nate and I bought this at Lowe's for $200 or $2.25 or whatever it was. And so the link to this will be in the notes. You can go to Amazon and pick one of these up. But let me tell you what, Skill did send me this bad boy. So the next generation is already here, and predictably, I'm skeptical, a little prickly, a little defensive. I mean, right off the bat, they've changed the color, boys. Oh, look at that. The handle is a dust chute. But you'll be hearing more about this. We've got a little time on it, and I have a few things to say. In the meantime, thank you for watching Essential Craftsman, and keep up the good work.